Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to part 2 of our 5-part exploration of the heart of the three principles with Dicken and Natasha Swerdloff, authors of the book Coming Home. And today we talk about the God problem, and in particular, what it is that keeps us stuck at the level of psychology in exploring the three principles understanding, and what is available to us if we're willing to look beyond the psychology towards the deeper truth that we talk about as mind, the oneness, the energy and intelligence behind life. Now, if you're listening to this in something resembling real time, towards the end of February 2018, Dicken, Natasha, and I will be leading a 4-day retreat in Ojai, California, called Silent Mind, Beautiful Feeling, Experiencing the Heart of the Three Principles. And you can learn more about that and book a spot at michaelneill.org/silent mind.
So years ago, I had a client not long after I'd first begun learning the principles. And she really liked what she'd understood about the thought-feeling connection. And she said, "But I want you to know I'm a strict atheist." I didn't know atheists could be strict, but a strict atheist. And all this spiritual stuff, this mind stuff you talk about, I don't want to. So I want to work with you, but only on the psychology. Now, I agreed, thinking, oh, okay, yeah, well, that's cool. The psychology bit, the thought-feeling connection, the living in the feeling of our thinking thing, that's great. So yeah, we could just do that. It turned into a train wreck of epic proportions, not just for her, because she wound up suicidal and, giving me a month to save her before she killed herself, but for me, because I didn't understand why it wasn't working. I mean, I was teaching the principles. I was talking about thought feeling. I was talking about how, where your experience comes from. And I realized in the end that to get stuck in the psychology of the principles was to miss the heart. And I just would love it if you guys have similar experiences or completely different experiences of what happens when you go beyond the psychological. And I'm tempted to say to the spiritual, but actually just I'll stick with beyond the psychological.
Well, I've definitely had those experiences, Michael, in the beginning when I started learning about the principles. And I was not comfortable talking about spiritual, especially because I teach in a business context. So when I coach people, I didn't feel that I could use that word. So I loved, and as you just said, I came up against all sorts of things that started to happen that wasn't the way I thought it would go. So one of the things that I've become good at, I think, is to try and use different metaphors for mind to talk about things that people find ordinary, to help them look at how life is bursting forth in every moment in us, in the trees and the animals and things. I love finding examples that everyone will go, oh, sure, that's it. And we don't have to call it spiritual. We don't have to call it God. But I think I feel sometimes like a detective. I love to find out what sparks people, what gets them into this, not a state, but they come out of their conceptual mind and go, oh yeah, that's how it is. And as soon as I see that in them or hear it in their voice, I know I've been pointing them in sort of the right direction. So because people understand, I find formless and form, how mind is that it's formless, and the way it shows itself into form, apart from having a physical form in the trees and all of these things, is also by giving us wise thoughts, wisdom that turns up. So it's information. It's getting these good ideas. It's becoming more loving. And these are things that everybody, I find, can find in their own lives. Oh yeah, that's a time that I got a new idea. I didn't know what came from, but I found a solution to a problem that I didn't know how to solve before. So I like to do that, make it ordinary.
It's interesting because I recognize in me, and I don't know if it's just a cantankerous, stubborn streak. I kind of like to bring God in anyways, just because it bothers people. To get people past the God phobia, even though I am talking about that same ordinary thing that you are. So for me, in a funny way, God is a metaphor for the ordinary, not that the ordinary is a metaphor for God.
Well, that's great, Michael, if we can get people past that God problem.
Yeah. There's one problem, God. Go.
I'm like you. That's certainly my bias. And I've also, like you, had some examples where I got stubborn about my words. And I lost my client because of my stubbornness about my words. And if we're pointing toward the experience of something beyond the psychological, because I agree with you completely. If people are only focusing on psychological, if they hear, Sid never talked about the thought feeling connection independent of thought as a formless, infinitely creative power, and a lot of people who get stuck in the psychological just hear it, my thinking creates my feelings, which is an impossibility. It can't work that way. Nothing in the world of form has the power to create something else in the world of form. That's my sense. So it's very important with whatever client we're working with is to be able to stretch them more beyond their usual way of thinking about the world. So the intention to help people go beyond the psychological is what we're always trying to do, so that they can see that there's a power and force behind the psychological that creates the psychological, that governs the psychological. So I like asking questions of people who feel stubborn themselves that makes it hard for them to answer. So I say, like for example, every atheist I've talked to, if I ask the right questions, they always at some point start saying, well, there is something more here than I can understand or that I can see. They'll say, I don't believe in God. And they say, well, what do you think about creativity? And they said, I think it's a great thing. I said, do you ever feel like you're creative? Yes. Give me an example. They give me an example. And I said, well, where did that idea come from? And they say, well, out of the blue. I say, great, what's the blue? And they get quiet. So a lot of times for me, it's finding the right question to ask people that helps them come right to the ledge, the cliff edge of what they know. And then the instant they say, well, I'm not really sure, then we have a different conversation altogether. I figure anything any of us say about something that's invisible or formless is just made up. They're just words. So Sid would say, if you talk about the principles, you can only talk about them using metaphors. I go, so true. Even the words we use, even mind is a metaphor that's trying to point toward the something behind life where things come from. Right? And spiritual is meaningless as a word. Most people use spiritual as referring to an experience. I had a spiritual experience. And so words can get in the way. Like Natasha, I couldn't agree with you more about that the words themselves can get in the way. And we just get all three of us have just learned to get more and more creative in face of either when we get stubborn about our words or our clients do.
Yeah, but I noticed that none of the three of us have gotten clear enough to the point where we're willing to do a 10-minute silent podcast.
That's for sure, Michael. That's for sure. Although that may be our next segment.
Tune in live.
Tune in live to watch us sitting here experiencing life on a deeper level.
So as you may have guessed, we didn't actually do a 10-minute silent podcast, though you're welcome to take 10 minutes for yourself and imagine that we did. In fact, in our next episode, in part 3, we actually go deeper into going beyond the words and what that means, but also what we find on the other side of language. This is all a sort of a preview of coming attractions. Dicken, Natasha, and I will be running a 4-day retreat in Ojai, California, which is absolutely beautiful if you've never been there. It's where Krishnamurti used to live. It's where Byron Katie lives. Gay Hendricks lives up there. It's a long-time spiritual spot. It's actually where they filmed the movie Lost Horizons. It was their substitute for Shangri-La. And if you want to learn more about that retreat and how to join us, go to michaelneill.org/silent mind. Until tomorrow, have fun, learn heaps, and we'll talk with you then.